I am Emily Barros, and I'm the founder of Bold Story Press, which is a publishing platform for women authors only. And I invited my friend, Barbara Collins Rosenberg, to join us today for a discussion about how agents work. Barbara is a literary agent and founder and president, is that right? I'm not sure of your title, Barbara, of
I
the
don't call myself a president.
Okay, Rosenberg Group, where she acquires books and works with traditional publishers to place books. Barbara began her publishing career as an editorial assistant with Viking Press in New York. And then she spent many years with Harcourt Brace Jovanovich working on their fine and performing arts titles in the Southwest. And she started her agency in June 1998. So Barbara, welcome, and thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure.
So many of the authors I talk to from my webinars and from other gatherings that we have are interested in understanding all their options, right? They want to know how one finds an agent to explore traditional publishing. Many of them also want to understand and explore hybrid publishing, and another significant group want to learn how to self-publish, how to take themselves through the process and publish their own book. I want to ask you some questions today so you can share some of your knowledge. And so I'm going to start with how did you become an agent? How did you go from working in the traditional publishing industry to starting your own agency?
So it was really very accidental. I had been approached by an agent, a larger agency. They had a curiosity about textbook publishing. Emily and I worked in college level textbook publishing, and they saw that as an area they thought they might want to explore. And I turned them down. But as an acquisitions editor in college, I was traveling a lot, and I had had a child and thought, well, maybe that's an interesting avenue. And so I decided to start representing college textbook authors. And in that vein, one of my college textbook authors literally whispered to me on the phone one day that she was writing a romance novel. And I learned, I thought, well, I read romance novels. I wouldn't know how to sell one. I wouldn't know what a good one was. But I learned that there was an organization called the Romance Writers of America, and I joined it, and I went to their conference. And about 9 months later, I began, in addition to college textbooks, representing women's and romance fiction. And I will say, having learned what I learned about romance novels, I never represented my textbook author's romance novels. She was just writing to vent. But she had no idea how to write a romance novel, and still is a very successful rhetorician who has never written and published a romance novel.
Okay. So Barbara, tell us some of your success stories, some of the authors or books that you've signed of which you're particularly proud.
So I won't say books because I can't even remember how many, but I can say that just a few weeks ago, one of my authors, Joanne Rock, we just sold her, and not sold, she just published her 100th romance novel. And I've been there for probably book number 18. Another one of my authors, Catherine Mann, we've just submitted her 75th book to be published, and I have been working with her since book number 2.
Wow.
So when you find an agent, It's really nice if you can look at it as a marriage, as a partnership, as someone that you're going to go into with forever. If it doesn't work out, like a marriage, you leave. And hopefully you leave on good terms. But those in fiction, I would say those are some areas that are really very special to me. Having been with people through 70 odd plus books and counting.
Wow. And that means how many a year?
So romance writers, as opposed to women's fiction, some romance writers can write 4 or 5 books a year. Women's, in order to be successful in this industry right now with women's fiction or romance, you've got to, at a minimum, put out a book a year, and probably 2 books every 18 months. Because in order to build an audience, you've got to get the volume out there. Some publishers will make a decision to not publish your first manuscript until they have your second manuscript in-house, and that's almost ready to go, so that they will put the books out pretty close to each other. The reason being, if I've just read a great new author, I want to get their next book. And if their next book isn't available fairly soon, I may very well forget about them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how they start building audience. Fiction, genre fiction, is all about building your audience.
And so I don't think anyone here is writing or is interested in writing romance, but the process for finding an agent is the same, is it not?
It is absolutely the same. We all work in the same manner. I will say this: when you're finding an agent, the first thing that you should be aware of is that the agent should never ask you for a nickel. So if you're looking for credible agents, whether you're writing crime fiction or young adult or middle grade fiction, we all work in the same manner. No fees, ever. We work on spec. We like your book. We like you. We think we can sell it. So we will help you get it ready to take out to the publishing houses. And that's no matter what your genre, what your age group in fiction. That's how it works.
And how many queries would you guess that the typical agent receives in a year?
In a year, maybe 5,000 or more.
So how does an author get their query, their prospectus, their letter in front of the agent and get them to read it? Because you can't read 5,000 a year, do you?
You do, you read them, but you know pretty quickly.
Okay.
Which is a yes and which is a no. It's so much easier now than when I first began, when everything was by mail. Send a self-addressed stamped envelope. That took a lot more time. And that's when I think you maybe didn't get in front of everybody, because the volume, but using things electronically makes it more quicker and easier. But publishing, while there's a certain romance about it, I want to be in publishing, it's a media, it's a business. And so while you may be writing the book of your heart, you also need to understand that this is a business, that agents don't get paid unless they sell your book and unless it's successful. So you need to put some effort into learning about the business. So when you write a query letter, you need to know, this is an agent that might be interested in my book. It's very common knowledge what agents want. There's a website called Query Tracker that lists what kinds of books agents are looking for. There is manuscript wish list, which lists agents' likes and dislikes. There's Publishers Marketplace. So do not send me your science fiction book. If you, that shows you didn't do your homework. I don't represent science fiction. So do your homework. Know that the agent you are representing represents middle grade fiction, science fiction. Do not send me a book, a romance novel that has 150,000 words in it. That's too many words. The market right now, 50,000 for certain kinds of romances category, 80,000. You can go up to 100,000, but the sweet spot is somewhere around 80,000 words. Know that. Know your genre. Don't say, I've written this book. I'm not sure if it's a mystery or a romance. That's up to you. Know what it is you've written. So if you know those things, you've now narrowed it down to the types of agents that you're going to look at, and you have a little better chance of success.
So let's say you narrow it down, and you find 100 agents.
Mm-hmm.
Do you send queries to all 100 agents?
I think that you should. I don't think you should send them all in one day, because your query letter should open with a little bit about your book, the title, the genre, the word count, and then a little bit of a bio, who you are. I don't need to know that you're a banker if your book is about a gardener, but just a quick bio. If you have some publishing accomplishments, you should put it there. If you went to a prestigious writers MFA program, you should put it there. But and I would urge you to address your query to Dear Barbara or Dear Ms. Collins Rosenberg, not Dear Agent or Dear Sir or Madam. So that's why I say not all 100 at once, because you want to try to personalize it a little bit. It's not a love letter. It's not a letter home from camp, but you want to try to stick out in a crowd. So sometimes it's fairly easy to find out what other authors an agent has published, and maybe you really do like that author. And so you might mention that in the letter as to why you're reaching out. Or maybe you heard this webinar and you heard me say, do the research, learn the business a little bit first. And so you might mention that out. So maybe, as many in a week as you can possibly do, you should do 15 to 20 in a week and send them all out. One big cautionary red flag: do not begin to query until you have written and polished your book, because you might send the query out today and you might get a response today. And if that book is not ready to go in, you've missed your window of opportunity. Don't just assume it's going to be months before you hear back. So do not query until you have written your book and polished it.
So at $5,000 a year, that means you're getting, well, assuming you're not working Saturdays and Sundays, that means you're getting 20 to 25 queries a day.
Correct.
That means, unless you're superhuman, you're not reading the whole query from everyone.
No.
So what causes you to keep reading versus, tossing it on the reject pile?
So I use Query Tracker. The agent portion of Query Tracker is called Query Manager. And it really limits the amount of information you can put in there. But I open it up and it says, I've written a romance. It's 85,000 words. It's the story of a young woman who has never gotten over the death of her parents, and she's searching for home. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. That's caused me to go a little bit further in. Or I've written a rom-com set in New York City, even though I've never been there to even visit, I've always been fascinated by it. I'm not reading that because, which is not to say if you've written a story set in Thailand that, and you've never been to Thailand, that probably wouldn't get, be as much of a red flag. But if you've taken the time to say, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles is a key character in my story, and then you tell me you've never been there, then that's a no. If it starts out by saying I've written 180,000 word, I got one the other day and I literally printed it because this person had written a 450,000 word book. I have no idea how big that would be. Gardner's Art Through the Ages, which Emily is familiar with, it's a big art history, but doesn't have 450,000 words in it. So that's how, it's just quick. So you click, 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 and there's a button on there, request or decline. And so that's how most of us are going through these things right now. So I might go on there once a day when I'm having my coffee and just go through really quickly. It takes longer if I ask for a submission, obviously, to respond, but I can get through queries very quickly now with Query Tracker.
Okay. How long should an author wait before accepting the fact that they're probably not going to hear anything and move on to plan B?
If you haven't gotten any response to any of your queries, I would certainly take a better look at your query, see if you know anybody that might take a look at it for you. It's hard to know because you read these stories of, people writing and winding up with success where the crawdads sing after years of being met with rejection. But if you haven't even had a nibble after 4 or 5 months, maybe it's time to look somewhere else. It's also really important to know that if you haven't had a nibble after 4 or 5 months, it's not a statement on you or your writing. It's a statement on the industry, the volume of things that we receive, the day in which the agent looks at it. Bad mood, rejecting everything. Good mood, happy, sunny, a little more open to things. When you go to the ice cream stand, you get vanilla and somebody else gets, Rocky Road. I like vanilla, you like Rocky Road. So it's not a reflection on who you are as a writer or a person. There's a big element of luck here, and you just haven't had the luck that's necessary. So, but after 4 or 5 months, it might be time.
And do most agents actually reject, respond to the query letter, or do they just not respond?
I respond. If you look on my Query Tracker or Manager, I'm sorry, the terms are interchangeable in my head because I have 100% response rate, but it's not Query Tracker, it personalizes it for me, but I respond because I just feel like you should know.
And do most agents?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make them a bad agent. It just, that's not their priority. It was always my priority from the very beginning to respond. I just think that's polite.
Okay. So let's open it up to some questions if folks have any questions for Barbara.
I have a quick one right now. When we're talking about query letters, are you talking about email or are you talking about hard copy letters?
No one is accepting hard copy anymore. So it's email. And as I said, a lot of agents are using that Query Tracker, Query Manager system. Some will just post their email and have you send it a query letter that way, but no one's sending hard copy anymore.
So if you're sending it as an email, is there something specific in the subject matter line that you want to have in there, such as, query dash, or, I mean, is there something that you're supposed to put in there so they know that's what they're receiving?
You might put your genre in there. So you might YA rom-com or middle grade or a picture book in your subject matter.
How do you figure out exactly what your genre is?
By reading a lot, by looking at books and authors that you feel are similar to the type of story you're trying to tell.
But I've done a ton of reading, but I guess my question is, if I have to boil it down to a magic name for a genre, I mean, something like historical fiction or, how do you come up with the term? I'm not doing a rom-com, so that's out.
Well, it's hard to describe, but it's really incumbent on the author to know what it is they're writing. So it could be just a general women's fiction that has an element of suspense in it, and you could describe it that way. Or it could be an historical novel set in the 1700s, or an historical novel set at in Reconstruction. Pardon me?
Depression. Mine is set during the Depression.
Okay. So an historical novel set in the Great Depression. Actually, there was a book, The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, that was out last fall. I think I read it. That was set in the Depression. But it was sold as women's fiction, and she has a big name, so obviously people are drawn to it. But it's really incumbent upon you to label it. And it's not easy, but I mean, there's general fiction, and maybe it's just general fiction. So I would just say this is general, or I would say it's historical fiction set in the Great Depression.
Okay.
Other questions?
Sure. Sure. This is Noel. Question about agents versus non-agents. What percentage of authors use agents? What percentage don't? And can you list the qualities that an agent brings to a budding author that not having an agent doesn't?
That's an easy question. Okay. 100% of writers that are published by the big 6 publishing houses are represented by agents. Probably close to 100% of writers published by the slightly smaller houses are also represented by agents. The reason being is the publishing houses want a buffer between them and the writer, 1. 2, it's cheaper than them having a lot of assistants reading slush piles, which they used to do and they don't anymore. And it also prevents that buffer prevents claims of, well, you read my story and you stole my idea, kind of a thing. Writers that don't have agents go with smaller houses. Sometimes they go with a hybrid house like Emily's, which we hopefully talk about later in this. And what does an agent bring? So I can tell you, recently I signed an author team, 2 women writing together, writing an historical romance. And what I hope I have brought to them is that I read the first time I read the manuscript, I loved it. I thought it was funny and quirky and different, but I could see there were elements of it that I felt cheated on. There were, things that I thought were going to happen, that they were going to bring those elements out more, that they didn't. So I asked them if they thought they could do that. I told them I thought if they wanted to do it, there were one particular storyline that I thought was weak that they could just throw out. And they felt like my ideas were worthwhile. So we decided to work together. Do not sign with an agent just to sign with an agent. Because if I told you that I felt that I wanted this element brought out more in the story, and that this particular storyline seemed superfluous to me, and you didn't agree with that, then you shouldn't work with me. We should be copacetic. If your editor is telling you to do this stuff, if it's now the agent successfully sells it and the editor wants those changes, then it's more of a negotiation because the editor kind of has the final say. But you have to be on the same wavelength as the agent.
Very helpful. Thank you.
And what's the typical fee that an agent charges, Barbara?
So agents don't charge anything. They get 15% of everything.
And is that from the author's portion or from the publisher's portion?
There is no publisher's portion. So if you sign a book, if an agent sells a book for $100,000, and it is $100,000 advance, generally that advance is paid out in 4 payments along the publishing timeline. So $25,000 each time. And of that $25,000 each time, the agent is taking $3,750 and sending the author the rest. And the money is coming to the agent. So there's an Association of American Literary Agents that a lot of agents belong to. It started as the AAR, the Association of Author Representatives. And one of the first things in that is an ethics code. You need to make sure that you trust this agent because they're getting your money, and you want to make sure that they're going to send it to you and that they're going to send it to you in a timely fashion. But it's 15%. It's 15% of the book. It's 15% if it goes to pay of royalties. It's 15% if it goes to paperback. It changes if there's a movie deal and you have to get a co-agent. Then it's a 20% total, but you're splitting it between the film agent and the book agent.
Okay.
But none of it is out of pocket from the author. The author doesn't pay anything. All is coming as a payment from the publishing house, from the production company. The author pays nothing to have their book published.
Well,
unless they decide to go with a hybrid press, then that's completely different.
And an advance is an interest-free loan, right? It's not a gift from the publisher. You will pay back that advance before you start to receive your royalties.
Well, so yes, but you're not paying it back in that you're writing a check.
Right.
The publishing company is taking a chance on you. They're offering this advance thinking that they can make more money on the book. So if I can digress just a quick second, it's not always a great thing. It's a great thing for me to get you a big advance. And it's a great thing for you because you get the money up front. But if you don't earn your advance out the first time, okay. But the second big advance that you get and you don't earn it out, it's going to be hard to even maybe get a deal after that, because if the publisher is looking at you as someone who's they're losing money on. So while big advances are wonderful, they're not always a blessing in that you have to earn out that advance. They don't ask you for the money back, but it's your only shot.
Yeah, I don't, in my 35 years of publishing, I never seen a publisher recover the advance, even if the author didn't write the book or send
Correct.
it in. We threatened to, but we never did.
Correct.
Even if the manuscript, even if the contract is canceled for some reason. So.
And that's why it's given out in portions, because you're protecting, the publishing house is protecting your interest. And if I could just say something about Emily right now, if you don't mind, Emily.
No.
Coming from the world of publishing that Emily and I worked in, we were essentially running our own publishing house at that particular time, even though we were under the auspices of a big house, because we were responsible for buying the product, making sure the product fit, finding the right editor to shepherd that product to the larger audience, shepherding it through the production process, the marketing and sales. So we had to ensure that we were not going to be canceling any contracts, that we were not paying too much money out in the beginning, because we had our goal as an editor was to make not money for the author, but to make money for the publishing house. We had to make sure that we were not picking a losing proposition. And so a winning proposition makes money for everybody. So it's not a big stretch for Emily to run a publishing house, because she was running a mini publishing house for many years.
Right. Abby, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Barbara. My question, Barbara, is you mentioned that you have some authors who've written 75, 100 books. When you are reading a query letter, how much are you thinking about the author's potential to be writing the next books versus this one idea that they're writing to you about? In other words, in the query letter, do you need to be convincing the agent that you're not a one-time one book writer?
That's a great question. And I certainly think in fiction, it's helpful. In nonfiction, and Emily and I have talked about doing one of those down the line, it's not. But in fiction, yes. And if you think about your own fiction reading habits, and I could be wrong, but I'm guessing you've read more than one book by a particular author. Would that be?
Yes, I actually loved The Four Winds, and I've read
Oh, didn't you love that book? I loved it.
Favorite books last year.
Me too.
So I see what you're saying, but I mean, so if you only have one thing written, should you try to focus on getting like some smaller things published, like articles, or?
No.
No, okay.
Once you finish your first book and start sending it out, start writing your second book, because sometimes we sell a 2-book deal. So not that long ago, I got a 5-book deal. Still not quite sure how I pulled that off, but on one book. So the voice is really important. So you look at it and you go, this is interesting. I haven't heard this voice before. I love this story. What other stories do you have? And that's certainly something that I would ask you if we got past the query stage and I asked for the 3 chapters and the synopsis, and we got past that stage, and I would say to you, I'd really love to see the complete. Do you have any other books in mind? In genre fiction, a lot of books are written as a 2-book series or a 3-book series. In just straight women's fiction, they're not. But you might say, actually, I'm working with something now where this particular book is a fictionalized story of an historic trial. And so it's a woman protagonist, and it's historical, and it's set in the judiciary world. And the next book that this woman is working on, and it's 3/4 done, is a woman protagonist in the historical world as a bootlegger. So So it's not genre fiction, it's straight women's fiction, but she already has the next idea and it's set. And if you read Kristen Hanna, her books all have a certain feel about them. So it's set in a world that's a little bit familiar, not too far astray, and has a particular voice.
Okay.
So no, we don't care if you've written articles and things like that. That works for nonfiction. But for fiction, if you've written your first book and you're satisfied with it, you should try to start querying it, but be working on book 2.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. If you have, I've written a book and am trying to decide whether to try to go the route of an agent, which would probably be my preference, or to self-publish and then find a publicist. Could you speak to that? Do you hear, what do you hear in the industry?
It's very hard to self-publish, which is why Bold Story is a nice alternative, because Emily brings the wherewithal and the know-it-all to the table. As a self-publisher, and people do it successfully, but you now have 100% of your time in here. So you've got to write it. You've got to find the right editor to edit that book for you. You've got to print it and bind it and manufacture it. And so a publicist can be good, but the good ones are expensive. You need to hire that publicist probably 6 months out. And they need to start trying to gain attention. And there is a possibility, because this is a traditional business, that the publicist may not, particularly if it's fiction, may not get a lot of traction because it's your first book and you've self-published it. So having the power of a publisher, even a hybrid publisher behind it, might give you more leverage in getting your book out there. And when I first started as an agent, if we heard you'd self-publish something, probably wrongly, but we made the assumption that you just couldn't, it wasn't good enough. That's no longer the case by any stretch of the imagination. People that are self-publishing on their own successfully are doing so in a way that essentially is they've had a lot of success publishing their books with a traditional publishing house, and they've taken their older books that they've gotten the rights back to and repackaged them, and they publish the older books in order to drive sales of their frontlist books. Did that make, that's very jargony, so I'm not 100% sure if that was clear, but that's.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. Thank you.
Noelle.
I have 2 more quick ones. Until I went onto Bold Story's website, I never heard the term women's fiction. What does that mean? Does it mean it's just for women to read? Does it mean that kind of the foundation of the book is based on women? What does that mean? That's question 1. And the other, real simple, in the industry out there, what percentage are still being published paper and what are being published digital?
Okay. That's the harder question, actually. Women's fiction is a story that has a woman protagonist, and it is a woman's journey. It is not only read by women, but it's primarily read by women. 52% of all books published are romance and women are romance and women's fiction. So it is the bulk of what's out there. But then you asked, what was it, hardcover versus paperback? Is that what you asked? I'm sorry.
No, digital versus
Okay.
paper.
So I really can't answer that. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I do know that there are all trade publishing houses now have digital divisions, and they use their digital divisions to test whether an author will get any traction or not. Also, a lot of the books that skew a bit younger, I don't love reading digitally. Honestly, though, I have a 20-something-year-old who refuses to read digitally. He only wants to read a book. So there, but you'll see a lot of, they're looking at, can they read the book on their phone, on their commute and whatnot. So a lot of the NA, new adult, they'll try it that way, but I don't know what the percentage is.
No, well, I'm sorry, what was the question again? What's the percentage of sales ebook versus print?
Yes, basically, yes. That was the question.
Well, it does depend on the genre. When I first started researching, in the trade markets, I assumed that more young people would buy digital, and it was people my age or 50 or older who preferred the print because that's the way we grew up reading, right? And I've learned that the opposite is true, that young adult fiction buyers, and that's a huge market, prefer to buy print, hardcover print books. And people my age prefer to buy digital copies because we have several books on our reader, whatever that Kindle or whatever form that reader takes. So there you go. 80% of books today are bought on Amazon, but that's both print and ebook. And I've seen numbers that suggest that ebooks might have a slight edge on print, that it might be 55-45, something like that for your typical market.
So it's interesting to hear both what Barbara and Emily said, because about 2 years ago, I was on a subway and it was a packed subway, and I something astounded me. So I took a photograph of it. Every single woman on the subway car was reading a physical book. Every single man was on his cell phone.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, what a statement that is.
It never occurred to me that it was a gender issue too.
Me neither, until I saw that. And I just thought, oh my goodness, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
True at my house. Absolutely true at my house. My husband sits in front of his computer all day long reading.
Yeah.
Well, they don't have to be reading to be on their phone either.
True.
Right.
I mean, reading a book.
They
Right.
could be playing Angry Birds or whatever that is.
Right. But on the subway, there was no man, and it was packed. I mean, there were probably 50, 60 people in this one car. No man was reading a book or a newspaper.
Fascinating. Yeah.
That could have to do with not having a purse or a bag to throw your book in,
That's a
or
good
your
point.
paper in.
Yeah, that is true. Rini, you had a question?
I have to unmute myself. Hi, sorry, I've kind of been in and out because I actually own a store called Fulfillery, a zero waste store in Tacoma Park, Maryland, to help reduce plastic. And actually that is what my book is. I self-published it actually, because you guys were talking about self-publishing. And I hired an editor because I knew I'd never written a book before. And so I thought it was important to hire. I went on Readsy, if you've heard of Readsy, and hired a professional editor, and she was really good. And I wrote the book, and my illustrator has been, was an art major, and can animate this whenever I get the time. But what I'm finding is I like the idea of self-publishing, because you hold your own rights. I have a friend who Cedar at the small reached out to him environment and talked turning into.
Rini, you're breaking
and
up.
oh, I am.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know why. No, I don't know why.
You want to try it again?
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So no, we
So-
heard up until the point about publishing it and finding the editor and the design and the illustrator. So what was your question then?
I've read a lot about books, and I mean, they're hard to sell in general because like 42,000 books come out every year, right? And I know that this is an educational book. Everyone who's read this has improved their plastic footprint. It's a really simple story about a little girl who makes friends with a bird, and they go to a birthday party, and there's all this stuff that hurts the bird. And so it's very simple, and it makes people understand, like, this is one behavior that you could change. And so I was wondering, how do I get into, I'm finding that I don't have time to do the marketing. That's what I'm finding. And it just takes way too long. Actually, at my store, because I own Fulfillery Zero Waste Store, that's where I sell my book. It's because I'm here, but selling it anywhere else, I just don't have time because I'm running a store, I have kids. So I was wondering, so that's why I want to look into a publisher or a literary agent, because I'm realizing I just don't have time. I hate to lose any kind of rights on my books, but the other thing is and it is a series, and it is all going to teach things about composting and living minimally and, all that stuff within a kid's children's book. And I was wondering, is there a better publisher for just educational, is there a better way it's basically educational is what it is. It's also a children's book, but
So
is there a better publisher for a
Rini,
better way?
let me make sure I understand the question. And first, let me say that you said that there are 42,000 books published every year. The latest estimate is that there are 1.7 million books that are self-published every year. 1.7 million. So it's quite a bit larger, than 42,000. And of course, the challenge is finding your way through that volume of books to find your readers. And so if you've already published your book, are you thinking of going with a publisher in order to promote it? Is that what you're?
Well, it's a series, so the other ones haven't been published yet.
I see. So you would approach a publisher about the next books in the series?
Maybe, if it makes sense, because.
Well, let's let Barbara answer that.
Okay.
So the first thing the publisher would ask you is, how many units have you sold of this book?
Mm-hmm.
And they won't care that it's hard to do the marketing on your own, and they won't care that you're a mom with kids. They'll just want to know how many units you've sold. So that's your big hurdle, is getting the units out. So, I understand that you'd like to control the rights to your work, but if you go with a publisher, you're going to give up those rights. There are rights you could try to claw back, like maybe you could try to preserve cartoon rights or things like that. But it kind of goes back to an earlier question about, well, should I self-publish? Should I hire a publicist? There's a lot of work involved in this, and it's time consuming, and it's very industry specific. And if you don't know the industry, you're probably going to waste a lot of time. So I would document all the sales that you're making, and all the publicity that you're getting without doing anything, but be prepared to be asked, well, how many units did you sell of the first book?
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Marty?
I just have a real quick question. You mentioned you mentioned Query Tracker, manuscript wish list, and one more that I did not get down.
Publishers Marketplace. And let's see, it's publishersmarketplace.com. It is a fee-based service. It's $25 a month, but you can quit after a month. So if you know what it is you're after, you could pay for a month and get on there. The other thing that's good about Publishers Marketplace is it lists a lot of sales each on a daily basis. And you can see, you can put in fiction, and it'll come up with all the sales that have gone through in a particular month or year. And you can get an idea of what's selling, who's selling, what agents are selling what. And you can also get an idea of how to quickly distill your work into a sentence, because that's all it is. It's like a sentence of, you know.
These are fill in the blank kinds of applicate or query letters.
No, Publishers Marketplace is not a query letter. It's a place that's going to show you what agents are out there and what's selling at this particular time. There is no, I'm guessing there are fill in the blank query letters, but I wouldn't want to get one.
Oh, so, okay. So it's generally like a one-page that you described. Okay, fine. I was picturing like an application where you.
No. These are places to find agents, and agents that are anybody can be an agent. You could be an agent. You could decide after this phone call, I could be an agent, and you could be one. But what are you bringing to the table? What experience, what knowledge? But there's no test to be an agent. So at least on Publishers Marketplace, you are seeing what agents are selling, what types of books. You know that they're actually selling stuff.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. And thank you very much, Barbara. Your knowledge and experience were very helpful and fascinating.
Well, let's do this again, Emily, and let's talk next time more about Bold Story, because I think that's pretty fascinating too. And having the respect I have for you as a publishing professional, I'd like to talk about that.
All right. Thanks, Barbara.
Have a good day, ladies.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Hi.